Red Wedding might be one of the biggest plot twists that the world has ever witnessed. Not only this, but the brutality in which it was executed left a lasting effect on all those that witnessed it for the first time. After all, Robb Stark and Lady Catelyn are supposed to be the protagonists of the show. We've been following their every struggle and success since the beginning of the show. If we are to go by normal fantasy tropes that we've been spoon-fed for the longest time, Robb was meant to defeat the evil Lannisters, but the show made it clear that Ned's death was no fluke, which leads to what made the Red Wedding plot twist so remarkable. Like Ned's death, the Red Wedding didn't just come out of nowhere. We see the protagonist continually make mistakes, and the show wants to hammer down the fact that mistakes, whether your intentions are morally good or bad, has dire consequences. Although Robb has not lost a battle, he's losing the war. He betrayed the Freys by breaking his oath and not marrying one of his daughters. He killed Lord Karstark, eliminating one of his largest bannermen, and his mother releases Jaime Lannister, a crucial captive, to trade for her 2 daughters. There are other failures I can mention, but the point is, Robb Stark does not deserve any special treatment just because his cause is good and just, which is often portrayed within media time and time again. Often the hero of the story gets to learn from his mistakes and make amends, while the villain is given no such luxury, which is not realistic of the real world. Now, if you've never read the books, the Red Wedding happens quite differently, and both have their flaws and advantages, but which one delivered this gut-wrenching plot twist better? I recommend you guys bring a box of tissues with you while watching this, because towards the end, the video gets really sad.
The Lannisters send their regards.
The bridge between the show and the books grow larger and larger as the seasons go by, with season 1 being the most faithful to the source material, and by season 5 and 6 they're no longer even comparable at all. Now, there are many reasons for this that I'll touch on in another video, but I'll start off by saying one reason why the show's Red Wedding was a lot more impactful was because the viewers formed a greater connection with Robb Stark. Now, in the books, we follow a series of characters through their point of view chapters, and in them we see the characters through their eyes. We learn how they feel and their perspective on the situation on hand. Robb Stark doesn't have any point of view chapters. Instead, we use Catelyn to catch up with what's going on with Robb. While we do see Robb Stark on occasion, it's hard to form a connection with him. He's mainly a secondary character to us as the reader. In the show, however, we get to see him as a young, inexperienced boy to leading his bannermen into battle. We see the effects of Ned's death on him and understand his anger and need for vengeance against the Lannisters. And most crucially, we see his love affair with Talisa. Robb Stark in the show is without a doubt the protagonist of the show.
Call me boy again. Go on.
In the books, Robb's love story was with a different character, Jeyne Westerling, and she doesn't even come to the Red Wedding with Robb. This is because it would be seen as an insult to Walder Frey. Their relationship is also never explored in depth like in the show. We just know through Catelyn that Robb is fond of her. Talisa is also pregnant, which makes the scene where she's repeatedly stabbed in the abdomen that much more gut-wrenching. Even more so that during the wedding she tells Robb that the baby will be called Ned. In contrast, Jeyne Westerling is given moon tea by her mother, which prevents her from being pregnant with Robb. I think they wanted to make the Red Wedding that much more impactful by making Robb's pregnant wife killed as well. And for the Red Wedding, it absolutely added to the tragedy, but I think adding her was a mistake by the show, which I'll touch on in another video.
It seems to me the father should have some say in his son's naming.
Eddard. Don't you want to teach little Ned Stark how to ride horses?
Now, this is where I think the show really messed up with the Red Wedding. It was clear that this is what Dan and Dave were building up to since season 1, and was probably what motivated them to make the show in the first place. Adapting the Red Wedding into screen definitely kickstarted the success of Game of Thrones globally, and there's no denying that Dan and Dave did a fantastic job adapting this. However, when regarding the build-up of the Red Wedding, I personally think the show really missed the mark. We are only foreshadowed of the Red Wedding in the show with 3 instances. The first was when Roose Bolton refuses to drink wine at the Red Wedding. The second was right before the massacre. Robb's direwolf, Grey Wind, gets restless in his cage. And the final instance is when Catelyn realises that the band starts playing The Rains of Castamere, a haunting tune that embodies loss and terror. The lyrics of the song immortalise the brutal downfall of House Rain at the hands of Tywin Lannister, showcasing his ruthless pursuit of dominance. And if you want to include the part where Catelyn uncovers Lord Bolton's chainmail under his sleeve, but by then the Red Wedding had fully taken effect. By the way, I thought it was really funny how unsuspiciously Robb Bolton puts his arm on the table.
Don't be suspicious. 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 Don't be suspicious.
The Red Wedding isn't dooming, they were going for this complete shock value. In the books, we are given foreshadowing of Robb's eventual downfall from the very first book. George R.R. Martin cleverly gives small hints and details that upon first read is impossible to piece together, but makes a lot more sense with hindsight, which adds to the Red Wedding even more. There are so many examples I could drop, but I'll just list a few here. In Book 1 or Season 1 of the show, for those of you who haven't read the books, in the Battle of the Green Fork, Roose Bolton marches Robb's infantry. In Tyrion's point of view, he sees banners of Hornwoods, Kerwins, Glovers, Karstarks, Freys, Starks in the front line, but no Bolton banners. Roose is leading the troops, but his flags are not seen by Tyrion. Bolton forces are in the rear. So Roose led Robb's bannermen to their deaths in the Green Fork, a subtle hint to which questions Roose Bolton's allegiances to Robb. In Book 2 or Season 2 of the show, Daenerys visits the House of the Undying, which is really watered down in the show. Here's the extract. Further on, she came upon a feast of corpses. Savagely slaughtered, the feast has lay strewn across overturned chairs and hacked down trestle tables. Asprawl in pools of congealing blood, some had lost limbs, even heads. Severed hands clutched bloody cups, wooden spoons, roast fowl, heels of bread. In the throne above them sat a dead man with the head of a wolf. He wore an iron crown and held the leg of a lamb in one hand, as a king might hold a scepter. His eyes followed Dany with mute appeal. Theon has a dream in A Clash of Kings when he sacks Winterfell and sleeps in Ned's room. And then the tall doors opened with a crash, and a freezing gale blew down the hall. And Robb came walking out of the night. Grey Wind stalked beside, eyes burning, and man and wolf alike bled from 100 savage wounds. These extracts are really spooky to read back knowing the conclusion. It fucking gives me the chills, man. There's so many more examples I could give. I'm sure some of you guys can contribute your own in the comments below. But these are the ones that stuck with me the most. These are obviously distant foreshadowed events that aren't included in the show, which isn't so much a problem in itself, but the build-up leading up to the Red Wedding is what the show truly missed out on. In the books, as Catelyn and Robb's army approach the twins to make it to the Red Wedding, there's a completely different atmosphere. There's a sense of impending doom and despair, which made me not want to flip the next page. The feeling of tense atmosphere is something the show truly failed to grasp. In the books, there's a horrible storm that produces bucket loads of rain. This lasts multiple days and even delays Robb and his army from reaching the twins. Most were grey, it seemed to her, though beneath such skies, the whole world seemed grey. As they reach the twins, Grey Wind is extremely restless and growls and snarls at Lothar Frey and Walder Rivers upon arrival at the twins. Catelyn notes this and was very uneasy with the fact that Walder Frey insisted Grey Wind is left outside in the stables. With hindsight, you can see why. "Your wild beast has a taste for human flesh, I hear, heh?" the old man said. "Rips out throats, yes?" Robb's direwolf again makes clear his distrust with the phrase. There was more trouble at the gatehouse. Grey Wind bulked in the middle of the drawbridge, shook off the rain and howled at the portcullis. Robb whistled impatiently. "Grey Wind? What is it?" "Grey Wind, with me." But the direwolf only bared his teeth. He does not like this place, Catelyn thought. Also, while we're on this section, I thought the show version where Arya stares at Grey Wind dying when they make eye contact was really sad, whereas in the books, Grey Wind just dies off screen. Furthermore, Lady Catelyn had such a trouble feeling, she urges Robb to demand for bread and wine upon arrival. If you don't know, guest right is sacred in Westeros, which prevented visitors from being harmed by their host if they ate wine or bread offered to them. She again mentions this when they first meet in the twins after Robb apologizes to Walder Frey's daughters. She even feels a lot better after eating it. Catelyn tasted the wine and nibbled at some bread, and felt much better for it. Now we should be safe, she thought. In the show, Walder Frey instantly gives Robb and his men bread and salt, but this doesn't have the same effect in the books because there's no sense of distrust or weariness as they approach the twins. So this scene is easily forgotten, whereas in the books, this moment sticks out in your head. Also, after Catelyn eats the bread and drinks the wine offered, the feeling of dread does not leave her, which is a clear signal that something's not right here. Walder Frey and his house also face consequences for breaking the guest right. Their house is cursed and looked down upon after this moment. In the books, it is brought up a lot that the Freys are damned and their image is forever tainted, which is probably why Walder Frey wasn't eagerly handing out the wine and bread like in the show. That's not the only brilliant bit of build-up to the Red Wedding George R.R. Martin cleverly sprinkles throughout the book. When Edmure first gazes upon his bride Rosalind, he notices something wrong. Edmure took her hand and drew her to her feet. "But why are you crying?" "For joy," Rosalind said. "I weep for joy, my lord." Again, during the feast, Catelyn notices something wrong with Rosalind. Poor Rosalind's smile had a fixed quality to it, as if someone had sewn it onto her face. This bedding ceremony also felt a bit rapey to me, like the men are literally carrying the bride and stripping her naked, making sexual remarks about her body. Same with the girls stripping the groom and trying to arouse him for the bedding, I suppose. Anyway, in the show this doesn't happen either. Instead they show her and Edmure falling in love with each other instead of the nervous wreck Rosalind is in. Catelyn persists in the thought that this is because of the bedding ceremony, but I think it was a bit strange that it was brought up a few times. I actually thought this would be a great thing to add in the show. It's super subtle and easily waved off as her being shy about the wedding. It just adds to the tragedy in my opinion. The music is another piece of foreshadowing to the chaos that was about to approach Catelyn and Robb. In the show, the music is played perfectly, and it's only when the band start playing the Rains of Castamere that Catelyn notices something is wrong. But in the books, it happens a lot differently. Catelyn notes multiple times that the band were playing the music really bad. Catelyn mentions how it gave her a headache and made her feel sick as well. Walder Frey must be deaf as a stone to call this music. The heat and smoke and noise were making her sick. The musicians in the gallery might be numerous and loud, but they were not especially gifted. The music is so bad that even Arya, that is still a distance away from the wedding, realizes the music sucks. The musicians nearer the castle were playing a different song than the ones on the castle on the far bank, though it sounded more like a battle than a song. "They're not very good," Arya observed. And there's a reason for why the band were playing so terribly. It's because these musicians aren't actually musicians. There are soldiers. More specifically, bowmen that shoot arrows at Robb and his men. Now this is one thing that I don't mind the show not including. The reason for this is because if we were to hear the constant horrible music, it would probably annoy the hell out of me. Especially if we didn't know the reason for it until the episode ended. Whereas in the book, you don't have to hear the constant loud annoying music, so it doesn't disrupt the scenes you're reading. But it's a cool little detail that makes the Red Wedding feel more realistic.
Speak a final word.
Kill me and be cursed. You are no king of mine.
Now this is a book only thing, as you can't really adapt this on screen, but George's wordplay is honestly brilliant. George likens the sound of the rushing water to a roaring lion, and paints really good Lannister imagery as the Starks are rushing into the lion's mouth. There's loads of lion symbolism sprinkled into the books that quite clearly indicate the Lannister trap the wolves are walking into. They heard the green folk before they saw it. An endless susurrus like the growl of some great beast. The Great John was already roaring drunk. The music grew still louder as they approached the castle. But under that was a deeper, darker sound. The river, the swollen green fork growling like a lion in its den. Fire roared in the hearth and rows of torches burned smokily from iron sconces on the wall. Robb raised a hand. "If you think the time is meet, Lord Walder, by all means, let us bed them." A roar of approval greeted his pronouncement. These don't really add much to the Red Wedding, but I think that is a cool little detail I'd bring up.
You're afraid of fire. When Beric's sword went up in flames, you looked like a scared little girl.
Now I'm gonna go on a little rant here about Arya, but in the show you can kinda see some of the signs with how D&D fucked up her character in the later seasons. In the show, they make Arya into this badass, strong, independent female character quite early on, whereas in the books, the dynamic between the Hound and Arya is one where Arya, although rebellious, submits to him. Their power dynamic is strongly in favour with the Hound, while in the show it's a lot more tilted towards Arya.
Someday, I'm gonna put a sword through your eye and out the back of your skull.
And while there's nothing wrong with that, we see how this festers more and more in the show where her character completely falls off the rails. Anyways, getting back on track. In the books, the horrible feeling of what's to come doesn't just persist with Catelyn, it's also expressed with Arya. I'm almost there, Arya thought. She knew she ought to be excited, but her belly was all knotted up tight. Maybe that was just the fever she'd been fighting, but maybe not. Last night she had a bad dream, a terrible dream. She couldn't remember what she dreamed of now, but the feeling had lingered all day. If anything, it had gotten stronger. Fear cuts deeper than swords. She had to be strong now, the way her father told her. There was nothing between her and her mother but a castle gate, a river, and an army. But it was Robb's army, so there was no real danger there, was there? The show also adapts Arya's weariness of her almost approaching her family with the Hound, when he remarks on her being afraid. The books go a step further by showing Arya's unfamiliarity with the people outside the twins. Everywhere Arya looked, she saw unfamiliar faces. Running, drinking, getting ready while she and Sandor were going deeper into the camps, surrounded by enemies.
We have to get the girls back. And then we will kill them all.
This is such a super depressing scene to relive again. In both mediums, the scene is so horrifying even after knowing its conclusion. Anyway, so you have all this dread creating sort of a snowballing effect in the books, and it becomes so bad that a few moments before the slaughter occurs, Catelyn literally can't wait for Robb to go into battle. Yes, I'm not even joking. The prospect of her son entering a battle to reclaim the North from the Ironborn is a relief to her. Her son is literally in a wedding. A few more hours and the worst will be over. By this hour tomorrow, Robb would be off to fight another battle, this time with the Iron Men at Moat Cailin. Strange how that prospect seemed almost a relief. Catelyn also yearns for Grey Wind despite the fact no one being in any apparent danger. She also starts to notice Robb's men being drunk, and she realizes no one's really fit to protect her son. It's at this point when you're reading the books where your anxiety and stress levels are at an all-time high. You know something's about to happen, but nothing can prepare you for what's about to occur, because shit's about to hit the fan. In the books and show alike, Catelyn discovers that one of the men is wearing chainmail under their sleeves. In the show it's Roose Bolton, and in the books it's Edwin Frey. Anyways, she bitch slaps him and then runs to Robb. In the show it's so much more gut-wrenching because we start off with Talisa repeatedly getting stabbed in the uterus. Like Jesus man, she's pregnant and everything. It's horrifying to see the panic bestow her face. In the books, Robb gets the first hit, and that's when you know he's fucked. After Talisa is stabbed, the arrows hit Robb and his men, as in the books. But in the books, there's this little shadow of hope when a bunch of Northerners break into the Red Wedding. But to Catelyn's horror, they're all against her. It's beautifully captured with one of George R.R. Martin's best lines. Hope blew out like a candle in the storm. The small John really comes into his own in the final moments of his life, having the strength of arm and presence of mind to protect his king with a trestle table, fighting back against armed men with a leg of mutton, but in the end, he's killed off. If you aren't too sure who this character is, in the show he's the one that declares Robb king in the North.
There sits the only king I mean to bend my knee to. The King of the North!
The actor didn't return after that season, which is a shame. That's another complaint of mine, since in the books we form a closer connection with Robb's men, like Daisy Mormont and the Small John, so their deaths affected the reader a little more. So the show and books both have Catelyn hold a captive and put a knife to their neck. The show uses one of Walder Frey's wives, while the books use Jingle Bell, one of Walder Frey's dim-witted grandsons. The hostage trade doesn't work out, however, and what happens next is probably the most nightmarish stuff to watch. I think in the show they did really well translating this onto screen, and none of this would have been possible without Michelle's world-class acting depicting Catelyn's grief and pain she's feeling in that moment. Her scream after Robb gets killed just fucking gives me chills, man. In the books though, we're inside her head, so it's even worse. Catelyn has a full-on meltdown. She literally tears chunks of her flesh off her own face with her own nails, and when the blood trickles down her face, she begins to laugh. Her final thoughts are with her family. To her, not only are Robb, Bran, Rickon, Ned, her father, and Arya all dead, but her only surviving daughter is married off to a hideous imp. It hurts so much, she thought. Our children, Ned, all our sweet babes. Rickon, Bran, Arya, Sansa, Robb. Robb, please, Ned, please, make it stop. Make it stop hurting. The people around her witness her losing her mind, so they kill her out of mercy, since I'm pretty sure the original plan was to keep her hostage. So Ryman and Black Walder were circling around her, but Catelyn did not care. They could do as they wished with her. Imprison her, rape her, kill her. It made no matter. She had lived too long, and Ned was waiting. After which we're hit with the killer line after Black Walder grabs her scalp to cut her throat. No, don't. Don't cut my hair. Ned loves my hair. Then the steel was at her throat, and its bite was red and cold. Obviously in the show it's hard to translate this into screen, since we are dealing with different mediums. I'm not too sure I'd be able to stomach a Catelyn meltdown on television. It'd be too much, to be honest. Maybe her last lines in the show could have been, "No, don't cut my hair, Ned loves my hair." But I'm not too sure it would translate well into dialogue, and Michelle's last stare into the abyss was all that needed to be shown. As for Arya, she ends with herself getting killed by the Hound. In actuality, she just gets knocked out, so for a while we as the reader believe she's dead. However, this is much harder to pull off on screen, so we don't really get that in the show. What's even sadder is that Arya, Sansa and Bran all looked up to Robb's bravery after his death. Bran was scared of this place, and almost as scared of admitting it to the reeds. I'm a prince of the north, a Stark of Winterfell, almost a man grown. I have to be as brave as Robb. She wanted nothing more than to crawl back into bed and pull the drapes. I must be brave, like Robb, she told herself, as she took her lord husband stiffly by the arm. You are Arya of Winterfell, daughter of the North. You told me you could be strong. You have the wolf blood in you. The wolf blood, Arya remembered. I'll be as strong as Robb. I said I would. When Robb's younger siblings think about giving up, they immediately think of Robb, his bravery, and that he died doing what he had to do for his family. A boy who started as a child sword fighting with wooden swords, to fighting a war against seasoned veterans, forced to grow up and fight in a war he didn't start. So which should I prefer? Well, there's no doubt that leading up to the Red Wedding, the books did a much better job. As the reader, feeling the sense of dread as you turned over the next page, the anxious feeling building up as you continue to read on, it puts you inside the shoes of Catelyn perfectly, which is something the show really missed out on. It's clear to see why though. D&D wanted to completely shock the viewers, which worked. I think it comes down to preference, but I think a lot of people would agree with me that the book's build-up was better than a complete shock out of the blue. On IMDb, the show's Red Wedding got a rating of 9.9, but I thought that in the episode, everything before the Red Wedding was average. Well, I say average, but that's for Game of Thrones of course. I definitely wouldn't rate the episode a 9.9 overall though. I think perhaps this caused some of the same problems with later seasons, with massive shocks that didn't really have any build-up, but this time the viewers caught on. However, when comparing the actual Red Wedding, I think the books and show alike both did a superb job. And honestly, I think the show might have just edged it. While including Talisa overall was a mistake, for the Red Wedding at least, her death was super impactful. Watching Robb fall to his knees and touch her bloodied stomach was heartbreaking, even more so with our better insight to their relationship, which the books failed to show. But I think it's completely up to the person watching and which one they saw first. I just felt it was worse to see with my own eyes than to read it in a book. Either way, let me know which version you guys preferred in the comments down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. Until next one, guys.